Ken Krimstein is the author of the graphic novel Einstein in Kafkaland, How Albert Fell Down the Rabbit Hole and Came Up with the Universe, which was published last year. It centers on the little-known fact that Albert Einstein and Franz Kafka lived in Prague at the same time in the early 20th century and had the same circle of friends. This week, Emmet has a wide-ranging conversation with Krimstein, not only about the book and the inspiration for it, but about the historical figures of Einstein and Kafka and the nature of comics. First, I'd like to thank our patrons for helping to keep the show going. You can pitch in by pledging at least $2 a month at patreon.com/deconcomics. This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Deconstructing Comics. I'm on the line with cartoonist, graphic novel biographer, Ken Krimstein. Welcome to the show, Ken.
Hi. Nice to see you.
We are good. Yes, indeed. So you are in Berlin. I am somewhere in the wilds of Australia. We're talking about a surreal encounter between two modernist geniuses of the 20th century in Prague. Lots to do here.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, when you put it that way, I'm amazed that I did it.
Yes. Well, first things first, just for the sake of anybody tuning in quickly, we're discussing Einstein in Kafkaland, which is your... I think I wrote a quick sort of summary. The story of your book is narrated by the Statue of Death from the vantage of Prague's astronomical clock, and spins out from the coincidence of Einstein and Kafka attending Berta Fanta's salon one night in the city. So this is an identifiable fact that you have, and everything sort of emanates out.
Yeah. Yes, I populate my books with identifiable facts, and where there are holes in the narrative, that to me is like cracks in the sidewalk. And plants can grow
Yes.
from there. And so there were several observations that I made that brought me into this story. And when I discovered that Albert Einstein, and Franz Kafka rubbed shoulders, as I put it, and this was during sort of a lost year. I thought, wow, I've got to figure out what happened, because when I do my work in terms of narrative, nonfiction-ish, we have problems with labels, but when I do this sort of work, questions arise. So Albert Einstein arrives in Prague on April 1st, 1911, and departs rather hastily and happily on July 25th, 1912. And Kafka is there. Einstein's 32, Kafka's 28. They're nobodies, so to speak, at this point. But by the time, now we can look back and say that by the time Einstein leaves, and by the end of that next year, Einstein has sort of cracked the code on what many call his greatest discovery, or his greatest invention, which is gravity, general relativity, however you want to put it. And Kafka is on the path to his first bona fide literary masterpiece. So the fact that, I put those ingredients into the stew, turn it up, and yeah. And the astronomical clock, the skeleton. Yeah. This skeleton, I was lucky enough to live in Prague for about a month when I was researching this during a lull in the pandemic. And there were no tourists there to speak of, just the very brave ones who would pull their masks down to drink beer.
Of course.
But I was able to notice the proximity of the geography in Prague. And lo and behold, this amazing astrological clock, which is over 600 years old, is the creature that rings the hours is a skeleton, and can see Bertha Fanta's salon, Franz Kafka's father's haberdashery store. And I thought, well, that's a perfect vantage point from which to narrate this tale.
Yeah, we start from the skeleton of death looking out across Prague, relating this story to us, relating the encounter between these two individuals. But then we start entering more surreal episodes, imagined episodes, as we've touched on already. The Chacho sequence, I think I happened to crack open your book. That was the page I first arrived on.
Yeah.
Or he's checking in with Einstein's rivals over in Italy, raging about the audacity of this clerk.
Right.
Challenging with this notion of light and the impact of light.
Yeah. It was a difficult, I knew that when I came across the little grain or piece of truth, as Einstein would put it, that they were in this orbit. I knew I had something, but I did not know how to organize this book. There were a lot of moving parts, to speak. And the skeleton helped me do this. But, a great amount of fun for me in doing this work is the research. So when I stumbled across the failures or the people who have been written out of the historical record who were keeping Einstein awake at night, I had some dramatic impetus. And this
you've got your Salieri character now.
I kind of have my Salieri, and there were also some connections. I grew up in the state of Illinois. I almost went to the University of Illinois when I found out that Einstein's great rival, Max Abraham, took a job teaching at the University of Illinois. I immediately thought, wow, this is incredible. So I called the University of Illinois library, and they didn't even know. They were like, are you kidding? Einstein's great rival. So they did some research for me, and they said, well, actually, he never ended up teaching here. He quit before the term started. And I thought, even better.
Yeah,
even better.
And his great revenge on Einstein is, you're going to have to go to America now. You're going to have to...
Right, you're going to have to go eat hot dogs. Yeah, so Max Abraham was fascinating. And as I dig deeper into the actual, record, so to speak, wonderful layers of the onion unfold that give me opportunities to draw. So Max Abraham's face, very...
angular, kind of sharp.
Angular and tight, and glasses and slicked back and proper. And his life, he's almost, as I put it in the book, he's the anti-Einstein, where Einstein was kind of from the country bumpkin and sort of messy. Max Abraham was from a very elite family, and had, maybe you would say, all the privileges, that Einstein didn't have. So they were a wonderful foil for each other.
And he's sort of still defending the status quo, and Einstein's breaking through this eggshell of 20th century modernism that's coming.
Well, it's kind of interesting because taking from my great mentor, Sam Gross, the late great New Yorker and National Lampoon cartoonist, he once said to me, Ken, you're a cartoonist. Cartoonists know everything. So then I'm allowed to just play in the fields. And actually, Abraham is not, he's on the edge too. He's not defending the status quo. He's pushing his own modernist, so to speak, agenda. And again, he's been vindicated in a lot of ways. But it's, I spoke to one of my lucky, I had a mentor, a teacher who helped me here, who was like a head of physics at the University of Chicago. And I said to him, have you heard of this character, Max Abraham? And he said, no. I said, well, my God, you're like the head of... He said, we typically don't study the ones who fail.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? Because that's where you get the really interesting stuff sometimes with the failures.
Exactly. Well, and if you compare that with how artists work, that's all we study.
Yeah. I just wanted to read you something, if that's okay.
Please. It's
from a book called Out of Our Minds, What We Think and How We Came to Think It, by Felipe Fernandez Ernesto. I was really taken with the amount of research you did for this book as well. Your bibliography at the back, or your list of research, was a great load. Well, we'll get to rabbit holes in a second. So this is from that book. Uh, in Einstein's universe, every appearance deceived. Mass and energy were mutually convertible. Parallel lines met. Notions of order that had prevailed since Newton turned out to be misleading. Common sense perceptions vanished as if down a rabbit hole to Wonderland. And again, we've got that connection, which you've pulled on, which is this great visual hook, the sort of the John Tenniel Alice in Wonderland illustrations that you're peppering in there. And immediately I'm understanding because you're plugging into another cultural artifact to get to Einstein. You're helping me along.
That is amazing and not amazing. I mean, I feel very gratified by what you said. I wasn't familiar with that piece, but the rabbit hole cliche, if you will,
sure,
has become reborn with a vengeance over the past decade, because the psychological experience of looking at YouTube and like, oh my God, I didn't
I'm down the
know.
rabbit hole.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It has come back. I mean, if you did one of those Google searches on whatever language, I'm sure it had a dip and it came back. But I feel that in many ways it's a perversion of what maybe Carroll's original intention was. And, again, as I said before, structuring this stew was hard, but the rabbit hole thing helped me. And, again, I talk about these sort of synchronicities or whatever when you're working. And, I didn't even realize how kind of, here I am in Germany, so a leitmotif, a continuing theme in my life, Alice in Wonderland has been. And it has. It's unavoidable. So I opened Alice in Wonderland, and lo and behold, the very beginning of Alice in Wonderland, this is written 50 years before Einstein's special theory of relativity, I believe, or general theory. Alice follows a rabbit down a hole and begins to fall endlessly. And she's thirsty, so she grabs a cup of tea as she's falling, and she's afraid of dropping it. She goes for a marmalade. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, that's almost exactly what Einstein thought about when he had his quote unquote happiest thought in 1907, when he envisioned, maybe saw actually, or envisioned a guy who was painting the clock and burned, falling.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow. So then as I looked more into Alice in Wonderland, the characters and stories within Alice in Wonderland, and, Lewis Carroll was a mathematician and a puzzle man. And there was, I guess, like the only word I could use is synchronicity. There were synchronicities there. Yeah. So, and the Tenniel drawings are splendid. But, again, I love this process of research. So I think I was at a bookstore in London, and I picked up a facsimile version of Alice in Wonderland in Carroll's hand. You can find it. And he illustrated it initially, Lewis Carroll, and hand wrote it. And the Tenniel drawings are not that far. I mean, they're, but, and also, Lewis Carroll was a very visual person. He was a pioneer in photography. And Einstein was a visual person. So the barriers that we construct between disciplines, as cartoonists, we just boldly charge where no man has gone before, or woman, and break it down. So that was fun.
That's where a comic is a really interesting medium to discuss these kinds of ideas, because it's so visual and because you can just juxtapose and crash through, as you just put it. I've often had a feeling that the English language is a terrible language for physics, but then I was taught physics in Irish. So that's another level of difficulty above.
Well, Well, it depends on how many Guinnesses you had
Well,
when you were working on it.
I have one waiting for me after this. But German, the German language, a lot of physics was taught in German, and maybe it speaks in a certain way in German. In Italian,
the combination of words,
yeah, it sort of gets the reader through what they're being asked to understand
a little bit. Just thinking on that. Sorry, Emmet, to interrupt, but I'm just thinking about a very, very simple term that is so useful is Gedanken experiment. Gedanken, to think, a thought experiment. So it's a wonderful, and again, I'm not a scholar of language, but it's a German term, the Gedanken experiment. And it figures in the book quite heavily.
That is where your Lewis Carroll examinations start entering the proceedings.
Yeah, but also, if you could almost say that both Kafka and Einstein and many of the modernists, and almost maybe, let's say, everybody is living a Gedanken experiment. This conversation that we're having right now is a Gedanken experiment.
Yeah.
What a wonderful way to look at the world.
Yep. And what I liked about that sequence, when we have the train sequence, I've heard you in other interviews talk about the train example to try and explain Einstein's theories and how frustrating it is for you because it's so linear.
It's weird. Yeah.
Which again feels like the trap of language. Whereas within the comic book, you're able to introduce these fantastical elements and also tease us with the idea that the thought experiment, this very dry, constructed phrase in English, well, now you're leading into dream and fantasy. How far away is the thought experiment from fantasy? And then we arrive in Prague, which you've introduced as Freaky Town. It's this freaky city. It's this city of madness, and hence Lewis Carroll again. So it's really interesting way to bring all these things together.
Yes, I think the language of bande dessinée, as I like to call it, the French term, is beyond just words. So Hannah Arendt, who I did my first sort of major one of these graphic bande dessinée nonfictions, had a great saying, which was storytelling reveals meaning without committing the error of defining it. And I really love that. Yeah. But then I've been thinking lately, if storytelling creates meaning without committing, pictures really create meaning without, because there aren't even words attached to it. Like, what is the meaning of the color red? No one can tell you, but it has meaning.
Yes.
In context. So this is opened up to me. And Einstein also, and I read a couple of quotes in my massive research, he was a visual thinker. He said, I'm primarily a visual thinker. And he did a Gedanken experiment. I don't even know if he knew it was called a Gedanken experiment when he was a teenager. What would happen if I was riding on a beam of light? Now that sounds like a Jack Kirby,
It does, yes,
image, right? Or I'm riding on a beam of light,
New Gods,
So I think the rhetoric, if you will, if there is such a thing, of graphic narration, and I'm working on a new book now, and I'm at the stage where I'm taking my sort of rough storyboard and story, and now, putting some ink to paper with it. And the content, what could I say? The content, the meaning, the messaging of the various frames is like a lever. It's like a force. It's like a tide pool, changing meaning as I draw it. But it has meaning in it. It's a wonderful, an incredible process.
I think you're summarizing Thierry Gronstein's theories of comic narrative that he sort of, but he gets into a lot more detail.
I have not, who, I don't even know who that person is.
He's
Who's
a
that?
French comic theorist. So
Good.
he's a French comic academic. So he talks about comics in a really interesting way.
Cool.
I'll drop you the reference.
Please do. Send me the link. Yeah.
I will.
Yeah.
He's an interesting character, but like when I was reading him, my sense was, okay, here is somebody who's actually describing the process of me encountering these panels and the meaning of these panels as I go through them in a way that, again, in English, I'm not encountering this. I'm not encountering it's too literal.
You make a wonderful, and again, I'm not a student of English. I in an academic way, but I think the frustration. I think Art Spiegelman, said it pretty well, and I may misquote him, but he said something to the effect of comics are the art of turning time into space, or something to that effect.
Yep.
And I think the fact that it is, the medium is linear. There, and as Brunetti, I think it's Brunetti or one of those guys talks about, maybe it's the other guy, the gaps between, between the frames allow something to happen. And another thing, I'm a big fan of documentary film, of all film. I've heard what I do described by some people as documentary, which I kind of like.
Okay.
But the neat thing about comics versus, or bande dessinée or whatever, versus film is you can stop. You can turn the page back. You can sit on a spread as long as you want. You can turn it upside down. You can smell it. I mean, I love that.
I really want to read your Hannah Arendt book because I read Icon of Jerusalem at an impressionable age. I sort of was very interested in Arendt because we had to study Heidegger, so I sort of went off in that direction. I saw the movie Hannah Arendt. Did you see the movie?
I have to say, and I even met Volker Schlendorf here, who used to be married to Margarita von Trotta, and she's a terrific actress. I never watched it.
Yeah.
I didn't want it to get into my head.
Yeah. But again, the reason I bring it up is because it was very, it was pump, 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 pump. It was very point. And I was like, this is a much more interesting story. Why are we doing this in this sort of leaden way? But the central performance, the actor who played Arendt, she's incredible. Like, she's very good. But the sort of structure around her was a bit, I wanted something more.
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, you can break the fourth wall. I tend to do, and you don't know it when you come in, but I use footnotes. And in the Hannah Arendt, I really used a lot of, and I put them at the bottom of the page, and they're tiny.
Yes.
Because there's no right or wrong way to read it, but that can break the narrative. And in a movie, and, I guess you could say maybe Wes Anderson sometimes tries to do that. Some people try to do it. But in a book, I can bust the narrative if I want. So you can read it through on one level, or you can go back and you can be disjointed and get two narrative levels going at the same time by looking at what I say in the footnotes.
It was very
what
fun.
The skeleton says in the
skeleton is talking to me on this page. The skeleton is directing my attention to this point. And I go, thanks, Mr. Death.
And Emmet, to go back into comic history a little bit, the voice of the narrator. I mean, I've spoken about this before, and again, I was really frustrated. And had I tried to plan this, or had I asked AI to do it, God help me, it wouldn't have come up with this. So not only did I have Alice in Wonderland, but then I still wasn't there. It still wasn't working. So I was looking through some old EC Comics collections, and I saw the horror books. And I have always hated the witch or whatever that, the evil narrator person. But when I saw it this time, I was like, God, that's great. That's what I need. I need an evil witch's cauldron person.
Didn't put that together. Yeah, your crypt keepers and your
crypt keeper, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, those guys kind of knew what they were doing. Even though whenever I read one of those EC horror books, I typically skip over the Cauldron Keeper and get right to the story because, Ray Bradbury did not write the Crypt Keeper. Ray Bradbury just wrote the story. But it's funny how sometimes the things that we most loathe are most useful to us.
Yeah.
More of Emmet's talk with Ken Krimstein right after this. This podcast is part of the Deconstructing Comics Network, where we're grateful to our supporters on Patreon. Patrons get exclusive extra content. Pledge $2 a month or more and get Batman 66 podcast Bat Bits and occasional trivia videos. Most recently, we presented trivia about 90125, the 1983 album from Yes. In the next few Bat Bits episodes, we'll discuss early drafts of the script for The Bookworm Turns. At $4 a month, you also get our new monthly show Silver Age Batman, where I'm moving through the book Batman in the 50s, issue by issue, with a rotating second chair of Paul, Emmet, Patrick, or Kumar. Follow our Patreon for free and you can hear the first 2 episodes of both Bat Bits and Silver Age Batman. Check it out at patreon.com/deconcomics, and thanks for your support.
Who's Who, the definitive podcast of the DC Universe.
Spanning from the first issue of Who's Who in 1985 all the way through the loose leaf edition.
Including all the updates, the spin-offs, custom Who's Who pages for forgotten characters, and tons of in-depth character spotlights.
Entries span from the golden age of DC
and into the extreme 1990s.
Covering characters such as Superman by Kurt Swan and John Byrne.
The Justice League by Kevin Maguire.
Batman by Dick Giordano.
The New Titans by Tom Grummett.
Wonder Woman by George Perez.
The Legion of Superheroes by Keith Giffen.
The Flash by Carmine Infantino.
Lobo by Simon Bisley.
The All-Star Squadron by Jerry Ordway.
Firestorm by Al Milgrom.
Aquaman by Chuck Patton.
So many entries talking about Ian Karkull.
The Forever People again, and again, and again.
And hundreds of other characters found in Who's Who, the definitive podcast of the DC Universe.
Available wherever you find podcasts and at fireandwaterpodcast.com.
Nuclear Man, Batman, Hawkman, 2D Man, and Hour Man. Who are all these people, man? They're all part of the DC Who's Who.
I also want to quickly touch on this a sequence that you have where you have a discussion of Kafka's insomnia and his morning swim.
Yes.
And you have him swimming with Max Brod, who's trying to encourage him in his literary effort. And he's trying to...
Yes.
And what was beautiful about it as a sequence was you've established through the narration that he can't sleep. But he's got these routines that he gets through the day with. So as part of this swim, and you've got this running over 2 pages, so we're going back and forth, we're doing the laps of the swim, he's pitching ideas to Max Brod that are increasingly frenetic and strange. But now that you've contextualized what I'm reading as, this is a man in the throes of deep insomnia, working through his exhaustion, speaking to his friend who's trying to coax something out of him, and this is what he's giving him, which is this strangely erratic thought process. And I was like, oh, Kafka makes sense to me now. Like, this actually captures Kafka.
Well, thank you for that interpretation. I had not thought of it, but now that you bring it up, I'll add something to that even more. And, when I'm writing or drawing dialogue, I try to get into where the character is at. So I will add to that, Max Brod is late.
Yeah.
Even another reason for Kafka to be pissed off at his buddy.
He's spinning his heels,
He's late.
Yeah.
What took you?
Yeah.
And he is, it is a matter of historical record that Kafka suffered from insomnia. And for anybody who has ever even had one sleepless night, it's a horrendous, I tried to describe it. I mean, if you have insomnia, not that I thankfully have it that much, but I guess maybe on occasion or something, the morning will never come. The morning will never come.
Yeah, because you're still in the day before. Yeah, I've experienced that. That's that sense of being spread too thin.
It's like
Yeah.
you can't wait for that first chirp of the nightingale or whatever, in the morning. So thank you for noticing that. But the thing is, again, this comes out of the historical record and how do I write or draw characters? And Brod, the relationship again between Max Brod and Franz Kafka, I love failures. And Brod is by no means a failure, but the people who are maybe on the sidelines, because the people on the sidelines will always move into the center, give it 100 years or so. But Brod was a great advocate for Franz Kafka. He wanted to put an art show on. So again, in terms of the breaking down the barriers between art and science, which is to me so fun, at the same time as I was writing the book, Yale Press had published a complete massive edition of Kafka's drawings that had all been somehow found. Like there had been scraps of them around.
Yeah.
But all of his notebooks were now consolidated. And for the listeners who really want to have an interesting experience, there are Kafka sketches that he has in his sketchbooks that look exactly like the cartoons that James Thurber would end up doing in the New Yorker some 20 to 25 years later. Exactly like Thurber's drawings. So this is, and Kafka was a very accomplished artist, and Brod tried to get him some art shows. I mean, Brod was an incredible promoter of Franz Kafka. And when I do this stuff, Emmet, and I don't want to rattle on too much, but just thinking about it, it's the humanity of these people that really gets me. Like he and Brod were traveling around Europe trying to write Europe on $20 a day, and they go to visit the Louvre to what the Mona Lisa had just been stolen in broad daylight, and people were lining up in the Louvre. They were lining up in the Louvre to look at the empty space on the wall where the Mona Lisa was. That is so Kafka-esque.
Yes.
So, anyways,
and you touch on the last trial of Kafka. That was the name of the book that came out a few years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, Ben Balin's book. Yeah.
So which gets into the Kafka estate and Brod and what happened there. Again, another digression. This book just sent me on multiple digressions. My notes are the picture of a madman. But what I thought was, again, going back to your styling of Kafka, how you present him in the art, the person Kafka, the physical person who Einstein met that night at the salon. As the story progresses, and we're following Einstein principally, Kafka starts reappearing as this Cheshire Cat figure. Is it Mac the Knife or the Man in the Moon? Were you actually thinking with Mac the Knife when you had him appear as the moon?
I had not thought of Mac the Knife, but being in Berlin, that resonates. Man in the Moon, very much so.
Yeah.
Again,
or am I misspeaking? I associate with Mac the Knife because obviously the song, but it's Mac Tonight. Isn't that what it is? It's the McDonald's mascot from the 80s.
You got me on that one. I don't know it.
Similar. See, he looked similar to how you depicted it.
Does it?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Kafka, I must say, I'm sort of proud of the way I simplified Kafka's face. And it took me a while to figure it out. But it's a triangle. He has a huge uni, enormous ears. And the one thing that really got me about Kafka, he was a bit of a dandy, and and he liked to have his hair all sort of bouffanted up. And Einstein's hair was always kind of even before he went full Rastafarian or whatever, I don't know, full wild. His hair just couldn't be controlled. And it's these nuances. It's funny, the hair, when you draw, like Hannah Arendt's hair, had a certain feel to it. And I believe that geography is destiny. I think in comics or cartoons, it is. Meaning that by situating, like drawings and paintings transport us into a world. And how someone's hair is is kind of what we think about them, even though we know that their hair actually has nothing to do with who they actually are. Yeah. But it does. And that's where we make our hay as cartoonists, you know. So I think Kafka, his angularity, his slightly more modern. Recently, and again, safe space. I love everyone. I love everything. But some people were showing me this biopic about Kafka that was just recently made.
Okay.
And it was pretty good. I think it was made in Germany. It was pretty good. But Kafka was short.
Nice.
Kafka was tall in life. He was 6'2". Einstein was 5'9". 6'2" is kind of tall. And if you're a vegan like he was and you swim, he probably was pretty lithe. And I don't think you can do a short Kafka. That's not who he was.
It sort of speaks to the popular imagination of Kafka that he's this sort of crushed figure retreating from the world.
Right.
You know, whereas he wasn't as
no, he wasn't.
He was very professionally successful, and you know,
he was not only was he professionally successful, he was honest enough to write in his notebooks about how he only wanted to write. But if you look at his insurance writings and what he was doing, he loved that too. And he was a do-gooder. I mean, he was trying to help prevent people from getting their fingers cut off in factories, which around the turn of the century was like a really kind of a good thing to do. So anyways, I try to overturn not sacred cows, but, you know, narrations change over time.
Yeah, I was looking into, I remember a friend of mine back in the day read his diaries, the diaries that were being published. And I reached out to him before this interview because, can you remind me what that line was from Kafka in that the letter he sent to his father? And he wrote back to me. He was like, no, he never sent them. He never sent them. He wrote them, imagining that he would one day send them.
He never sent that.
The first time was, you always asked me why I acted as if I was afraid of you. I was too afraid to answer. Which, again, I love that line.
Well, he had, you know, let me put it to you this way. It's the understatement of anything that's ever been said on your program. Kafka had a way with words. He really did. You know, there was a great quote, and I tried to figure out on a deeper level, what was the, you know, Kafka is also a bit of a cipher in the story because I couldn't really do a full-on Kafka. I could pick one or the other.
Yes, you go from a whole other direction then, yeah.
Right. So it had to be more about Einstein, but the Kafka notion of him being an embodiment of Prague at this particular moment in time really, really helped me. And both of them believe that there is a truth, but it's one that we're fated to not be able to understand. So 4D space-time is beyond our comprehension. And a world where the Great Wall of China extends infinitely, or, you know, monkeys, talk to scientists. So Kafka at one point, and I saw some similarities. He says there is hope, but not for us. You know, there's hope for God, but not for us. And Einstein says there is order in the universe. It's just no way can we understand it. Yeah. And something about the audacity and the stupidity of that combine to make these two. Then you mix in the skeleton and Prague and this salon and these people and this world. And I made some discoveries when I really, really dig down and look at the record. So there's one day when Einstein writes 2 letters to the editor of the Annals of Physics, NL into Physics, which is like the main book. And in those days, actual physical letters were the email of the day. So if you sent it, I think there probably might have been 3 deliveries a day. So he sent one in the morning post and one in the afternoon post. So that's about as close as we get to email. And in the morning, he says, dear editor, such and such, that thing I sent you last week, don't run it, cancel it. Then the very same day in the afternoon, he says, that letter I sent you in the Morning Post, ignore that, publish it. So I see the humanity and the confusion and the breakdown of the barriers.
Yeah.
And in a way, thank goodness, Emmet, that they didn't have email, because it might have gotten erased.
Right. See, this is where I think the connection as well between these two figures is how they are creating this upset, this revolt, and I think we can also. I'm going to attempt to connect comic books to this, but we'll see how we go. Is that they decenter the human from the field, like Einstein and Kafka, who Science and Art are both saying the person doesn't matter. The person, these events happen to them, or these events are witnessed by them, but like the person is not at the center of existence, and it sort of disrupts the teleology of everything that's gone before them, and that's where we start talking about modernism. That's where we start talking about these new movements. Comic books have this wonderful, again, 20th century art form, have this wonderful upsetting quality to them, because comic books just march in going, all right, we're going to take this, 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 and we're going to slap it together, and we're going to put it out into the world and try and make some money for ourselves.
Right.
And maybe we'll be successful, maybe we'll die penniless, but we're going to give it a red hot go. And this is the art form that we sit within, this sort of vulgar, let's just steal everything and see what happens. And that's comic books. And I kind of see that as a 20th century experience that we're still trying to unpack a bit.
I would endorse that. I think I've called it a bastard medium, and so was rock and roll. So were circuses.
Have you? Sorry to go across again, but have you seen the movie Sinners yet?
No, everybody's talking about it.
Oh yeah. Whoa.
Okay, I'm on it. I'm on it. It's
absolutely
everybody's talking about it.
I think there's a scene in this movie you're going to love.
Yes, and someone else mentioned that, so I will check that out. But you really bring up a great point about this decentering or whatever, and we can't really figure out why that's the case. I will say, from loving comics and cartoons, and I got into it just as a kid, like, oh, this is cool. And then, but I could draw, so that was good. And then, I was a history major, and then I started studying and learning more about them. Otto Sogla, the great king, Charlie Brown, I kind of grew up with, Watterson, Doonesbury, and there's something about the picture that allows you to say the uncomfortable truth. And maybe pantomime has always had that. Maybe the court jester has had it. But when you combine that with mass media and disrespected mass media, pulpy, anybody who's ever gone to collect an old comic and you go to a thing, oh my God, look at it, and you pick it up and it crumbles. It's like it falls into pieces because it's the cheapest paper.
Yeah.
But it's a response. And what is it a response to? Is it a response to Darwin?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Darwin certainly pissed off a lot of people. Is it a response to Einstein? Is it a response to Karl Marx or Groucho Marx? We don't know.
Marx, Freud, all these minds that sort of define the 20th century, and we're all reacting to them.
It's, the Beatles. I was just talking to somebody the other day. I don't think the Beatles would not have happened had they been in London. They couldn't have happened. The fact that they were in Liverpool and Hamburg allowed them to happen. And there's an element of Einstein might not have been able to have happened if he wasn't in this outpost of Prague, which I lovingly call the Cleveland, and your American listeners will know what I'm getting at, the Cleveland of Europe.
I know what you mean.
It don't get no respect. I want to pick up on one other thing, though. You mentioned vulgar. And as I was So my second book, which was about these lost autobiographies of Yiddish teenagers, came out in France in 2024. And I was lucky enough to be able to be there for the launch. They changed the title to Vivre. I like it a lot. And I was at an event and someone said, "Oh, you vulgarize history." And I took offense. I'm like, "What do you mean I vulgarize?" "Oh, no. Vulgariser in French means to make the complicated understandable." I had no idea.
We're coming back to language, the language which can grasp more concepts just in a phrase,
Well, I'll tell you something else about language. And again, I'm lucky enough to be able to write and draw.
Mm-hmm.
And little thing that struck me that I worked into the Hannah Arendt book, the difference between German and French. Think of the word butterfly in German, Schmetterer. Think of the word butterfly in French, papillon. What would you rather have, a Schmetterer or a papillon? You know what I mean?
Maybe it's pronunciation we're coming up short on, but yeah, I hear you. Yeah, it's sort of, there's the sort of aesthetic of the French language, and then there's the functionality of the German language. And those two
And
things
I'll give you an inverse on that. So another thing that people have asked about, Hannah Arendt talks about, she used the word, "I need to think this through. I need to think it through." And when my book was being translated into French, the French translator called me, what is this thinking through? What does this mean? And then I was asking some German people, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, it's like Gedank or something. Like, we have a word for that." So language does define.
Yes.
So I guess pictures tend to be a little bit more universal. You do lose context, though. You can, like, lately I've really, really been into Japanese hokusai and, of course, manga. I mean, I've been looking more into manga, Tezuka, Miyazaki, Ito, even some of the modern manga, which I don't really follow like people do, but I love I love the visual narration, even if I don't understand the words. But I know I'm missing context. But nevertheless, I'm getting a lot.
One of the hosts of this podcast, Kumar, he's a translator for manga. And
manga.
Yeah. He was working on a series, and it was a very successful series, and it was a good book to have associated with his name. But he quit because he couldn't capture the pictographic purpose of the Japanese characters in English. The actual pictographs were doing something on the page that the English word can't do.
My daughter is learning Chinese. So, and I've been trying to copy Japanese characters in some of the work. And, at first one looks at it and thinks, "Oh my God, that's just a mess." But then as you start looking at it, it's not a mess. There are verticals, there are diagonals, there are angles, there's repetition. It's not a mess. It's loaded with meaning.
Dense, like this sort of condensed structure of meaning, which again comes back to comics, because you are loading up the page with all these signs and signifiers, and the reader.
I have a lot of sympathy for that, and the art of translation is brutal, as we can all agree. But visuals can sort of take you there. But it also, I think, if one is being really, really perceptive, like, I'm hoping to go see the bust of Nefertiti, certainly before I leave Berlin.
Okay. It's in the Berlin Museum?
It's at one of the national museums here. It's that amazing, it's almost pristine. And I would say it's probably, from what I can tell, I've seen reproductions of it, but to actually see the real thing is going to be kind of overwhelming. Even though to the ancient Egyptians or whoever made it, I'm sure it meant completely different things.
Yeah.
But, being in Berlin, I went to the Humboldt ethnographic museum. And there was a lot of incredible stuff there. But one thing that really struck me was, and the Germans were experts at like snarfing up artifacts from all over the world and sticking them in their museums. So were the British, but the Germans really were good at it. They're like, we'll take that entire city, But
I'm familiar with them.
And I love the Germans. I don't have a problem. Please, I'd love. But they had, from an expedition to Colombia in the Amazonian rainforest vicinity, somebody went there in 1902 and brought back some costumes from shamanic healer type people. I've never seen ever confronted. Ever. Pristine. Could you imagine? 1902. And I'm going to tell you, it flipped me out. It makes me want to do puppet bunraku. It makes me want to go into 3D.
Yeah. I love it. Interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Just riffing.
No. This is good. I'm whenever I'm going to talk to somebody about something, I always do a little, okay, what do I have to hand? What can I draw on? What do I have in my library? I was looking through mentions of Einstein in comics, like what is Einstein's legacy in comics? I think there's a huge impact because, again, we've got that vulgar medium which sees the upset this guy's causing. Oh, great, we'll have some of that. And again, I'm also using vulgar medium in, I feel, a complimentary way because I'm down there with the mutts myself. I'm also somebody who just enjoys slamming ideas together and seeing what happens. But Jack Kirby and Joe Simon decide that the scientist who gives Captain America his special serum is Dr. Reinstein. It's clearly meant to be Einstein, but it's sort of like an alter ego over Einstein.
Wow. Yeah.
And then I remember Alan Moore. That's one per episode, Tim. Alan Moore really leans into the Einstein stuff with Watchmen. Keeps mentioning Einstein. It's a big influence on Watchmen. But I remember him on a British panel show, and he talked about doing a Star Wars comic. So when he was quite young, and he had this idea for the impact of gravity on a giant planet. And he was, oh yeah, but I don't really understand Einstein. I was a stupid kid. I didn't know what I was saying. And Brian Cox, the physicist, was on the panel. He says, no, that's it. No, you got it.
Wow. Well, okay. Certain amount of that is Alan Moore's incredible, imagination. But so, for instance, you mentioned earlier, I think in the talk, my frustration with the time immemorial example of the train car and the flashlight. It broke my brain. I can't figure it out. I could sit and study it like I'm studying the sutras, and it just doesn't make sense to me. As I said to someone the other day when I was talking about it, just the smell being that close to a train of all the stuff on the side, creosote, on the side. But I needed to try and show why light causes there to be different frames of reference. So, I was trying to explain this to my wife, who's very, very bright, but not a physicist by any stretch, nor am I. And that's where I came up with this idea of the freaky race, where light always wins. Always. Light is the fastest thing, 186,000 miles per second, 300,000 kilometers per second. Fast, but not infinite. But how is it that light always wins at the same frickin' speed? Well, there's not an internal clock. It's just when you compare two frames of reference, other stuff just either gets fatter or slower or globbier or whatever to make sure that light always is at that speed. And that to me made more sense than the observer on the side of the train track and the two flashlights, because I couldn't figure that out. So, it's hard, but we do have tools at hand when we do drawing. to explain these things sometimes.
When you have Einstein explain this example, and then you actually depict the race,
Yes.
from again, it's a beautiful example of how comics can do that. He is not literally saying any of these things, but we, the reader, oh, I get it now. There's the metaphor. There's the understanding that I'm getting.
Yeah, well, and similarly, another thing that just blows people's minds, and this is what Einstein and physicists, from what I can tell from time immemorial, have been vexed about, and why is it that if you drop a grand piano and you drop a grain of rice, they both fall at the same rate? The grand piano is a lot heavier than a grain of rice. Shouldn't it fall a lot faster? No, because actually, when they're falling, they're standing still, and the earth is rising up to meet them. And so anyways, I'm just saying, if you use pictures. Now, on the other hand, breaking dialogue down and simplifying it is also a great art. I've been looking at some work lately. I've been pulling by this comic artist called Teddy Goldenberg.
Okay.
I don't know if you know his work,
nope,
but somebody here, it's called The Retirement Party.
Oh, goodness.
Teddy Goldenberg. Okay. Yep. I think he lives in Berlin.
Uh-huh.
And it's peculiar in a good way. But then it's minimal in the way that what's his name?
It reminds you of Charles Burns a bit.
It's a little bit like Burns, and in fact, funny that you should mention Burns, because I'm looking at Final Cut, which Beautiful. Is his new picture. But the one that it really reminds me of is what's his name? Hanks, Fletcher.
Oh yes, Super Wizard.
Fletcher Hanks.
Oh, Fletcher Hanks or Fletcher. I think it's Fletcher Hanks. Yes, but he did a character called Super Wizard.
Yeah, really, really, really peculiar.
Panther was another one of his.
Weird, but again, your job is to edit this, but so they have, not to tell anybody, but they have like some flea markets in Berlin that are really cool. And I was digging through some of the stuff, and I found Italian fumetti from like the 80s, 70s.
Okay. Wow.
And there are some people drawing, and they're falling apart, but there are some artists drawing in those things and doing stuff that you just don't see. It never made it out of Italy, like manga. Some of that stuff never made it out. Anyways, we're deconstructing.
We're deconstructing as we go.
Do you have any other questions that you'd like to ask? I don't want to.
No, I think you know what I love when you I think you completely blew my mind, because I've always been saying, oh, the first science fiction novel. Well, obviously, that was New Atlantis by Francis Bacon, and then you're like, no, it's Johannes Kepler's book, and I was like, oh, okay.
Well, again, this is really just the tip of the iceberg of what I'm doing, but you go down the rabbit hole, and sometimes that's appropriate. And you've got Isaac Newton, who was an astrologer and a mystic. You've got Jonathan Dee, who was an astrologer and a mystic, and also hung out in Prague because the emperor of Prague, Rudolph II, was primarily into alchemy, which is why he hired Tycho Brahe. And Brahe, who figured out the orbit of the planets, hired Kepler, and Kepler figured out that planets actually don't go in a circle. And they were all getting a paycheck from the king to like turn lead into gold. But in fact, they were working on their own stuff, not dissimilar in many ways from what Kafka was doing at the insurance company. So I guess just to kind of circle back, and I kind of, if we are going to crash through barriers in what we're doing, and, I know that your podcast, you're very into Jack Kirby, and Jack Kirby is, When I found out that so one of my big influences was when I inherited these classic illustrated comics from my great uncle. And I loved them, but I didn't know, a comics aficionado scorned them, but actually Kirby drew in there. I mean, it was a paycheck for these guys.
Yeah.
And the editrix or the editor, Roberta Strauss-Freulich, worked subversive messages into late 1950s McCarthy America, African-American heroes in the Revolutionary War. So the fact that we are a bastard medium,
Proud of it.
Thank goodness for it. And Emmet, I will say, with all due respect, when you say you're slumming in the vulgar media forms, I don't know if you're referring to your comics work or your podcast work, but in the future, people will look at podcasts or whatever it is that we're doing, videocasts, and say, my God, this was the Shakespeare of our time. Not necessarily you, but there's rubbish in this world, and there's great stuff in this world. You know what I mean?
Yeah. This is great. And I think we've just summarized Dom DeLillo's Underworld. We're doing great here.
Better than summarizing his underwear.
Oh, no. We lost it.
Sorry.
Ken, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I do appreciate you taking the time. I'm conscious of the hour in Berlin.
Yeah.
And I want to let you get back to your day. But
yeah, I
really enjoyed the book. And how I know I really enjoyed the book is I'm looking at a note doc with all these crazy reflections that I've had as reading. So thank you so much for the experience of reading that.
Well, I really appreciate having the opportunity to have this interview, and it's really been a delight. Thank you.
Einstein in Kafkaland by Ken Krimstein is published by Bloomsbury Publishing. By the way, just to be clear, Japanese comics are referred to as manga. Follow us on Blue Sky at Decon Comics. On Facebook, we have both a page and a group. Those are linked from deconstructingcomics.com, as is our YouTube channel, where our episodes are posted every week as videos of a single image. You can comment on our episodes on YouTube or on our site, or drop us a line at mail@deconstructingcomics.com, or talk to us. Click the Leave a Voicemail link on the left sidebar of our site. Are you making a comic? Send it to us and we'll do a Critiquing Comics episode about it. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. The music backing the promotion of our Patreon is Change by Jazar. 6 years ago on this show, Kumar and Emmet discussed the graphic novel Eileen Gray, A House Under the Sun, by Charlotte Maltaire Bartes and Zosia Juzowska. Gray was an Irish architect and a figure of enough fascination that 3 different movies have been made about her. The third, E1027, Eileen Gray and the House by the Sea, has just been released, and to mark that release, we'll be re-presenting that episode next week. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.